And as Father Larry mentioned in his prayer, our presenters are Mary and Gary Whitmer. They're from St. Joseph and St. Patrick Parish in Escanaba. And they have a story that they're going to share to us today about returning to the Catholic Church. And this was an idea that came to us from one of our members last year. Regis said, we always look for your ideas from you for new programs. And Regis said, it'd be really nice because of the year of faith and our Catholic Church focus on new evangelization to hear a story from someone who was away from the church, raised in the church, away, and then came back. So we said, that would be great. How do we find someone like that? So I sent out an email just to a few strategic people around the diocese that I know, and lo and behold, we found the winner. So we thank you for coming, and without any more, I'm going to ask them to come up and tell us their story. Thank you.
Well, it's there, is that on? It's wonderful to be here. We are not polished speakers. In fact, we've never spoken like this before. So bear with us if we're going to sort of follow an outline to try and stay on track, because you realize as we prepared for this, you go back in time and you begin looking at the timeline of your life. There's a lot of incredible revelations that you didn't think about. And I know from talking with Terry, one of the focuses here is kind of where faith meets life. And so that's really what the focus of this is, where faith meets life. And then, because everybody here has their own story, and everybody on earth has their own story. But when you start thinking about some of the critical times that decisions were made that impacted on even whether you were given life in this world, then you begin to realize the role of faith in life, of life even existing from the author of life. So, what I think we'll do is we'll sort of follow our outline to give the story, and then we'll just sort of interject. My husband was warning he was going to get a very bad case of laryngitis today. The other thing I just want to point out that is pretty amazing to me, that right here, keeping it real, is one of my fellow we went to medical school together, and that was just such a shock when Jim walked in. And then from our high school days, Barb Hines remembers the conversations going on with my mother and the peer group that were watching their teenagers go wild. So this is like amazing. This is really keeping the story real. So 1955, 1956, that's when each of us were born, both of us born into Catholic families, both of us middle children. I was the middle of 9 children.
Middle of 5.
In the middle of 5 children. He was born in Monroe. I was born in Tacoma, Washington, but our family moved a lot and eventually ended up in Newberry.
Her father was the superintendent psychiatrist at the state hospital back in the heyday of the state hospital in Newberry. So.
Yeah, so we were into the mental health system. But we both received baptism, confession, the Eucharist. I was confirmed. Gary did not. You want to say what interrupted?
Yeah. No, at 3rd grade, I believe it was about 3rd grade, that my family decided they weren't going to go to the Catholic Church anymore. So, I'm sure there are reasons my father tells me sometimes, but anyway. And then they ended up getting divorced, I think, when I was about 12. So.
Yeah. So we both ended up in Newberry, and I would have to describe that up until that point for our family in St. Louis, Missouri, at that point of several moves, parish life was very much a part of our 9 children's lives. And Friday nights were fish fries at the church, and went through Catholic education. And I remember it as a beautifully joyful time. And I remember that all of our friends had 11 kids, 12 kids. We kind of were small at 9 kids. That was the norm. And But then things in culture were changing, which at my age, I didn't understand what was going on. But evidently, my older brother, there were some issues, and then there were racial tensions in St. Louis, Missouri, and riots were beginning to break out. And my father looked for a place to leave and take his family, and Upper Michigan was it. I remember when we crossed the Mackinac Bridge, and I was just awed and amazed coming from St. Louis, Missouri. So we moved to Newberry, and so that's where really the rest of the growing up years were going to be spent. When we got to Newberry, the parish was different in that it didn't seem like the Friday night fish fries were going on, and this might have just been a reflection of, the Catholic school had just closed, I think, not too long before we got there. And then, there's all that talk about what was happening with catechesis. Things just changed, and it seemed like no longer were the events happening as family events, but the youth were kind of doing their thing. And it just seemed like one by one, 9 children, we sort of just started doing our own thing. I mean, I already had a brother in deep rebellion coming to Newberry, and drugs played a part in that. But then it just seemed like one problem after the other began happening in the family. And you could see how it was beginning to just take a toll on what the peace in the home was. And it was through no fault of my parents. I mean, I look back now and I go, what the suffering. You have 9 kids, and one after the other, you've raised them in the faith. I mean, I can't say that I was poorly catechized as a child. I was beautifully catechized as a child. Once I hit adolescence, I go over and over in my mind, what happened? But one by one, each of the kids kind of put my parents through a really hard time. And what was happening for your adolescence?
Oh. Yeah. I moved to Newberry in '71 with my mother and stepfather, and so we really didn't attend any type of church service or anything like that. After we left, after the parents were divorced, I think none of them, continued going to church.
So it's interesting because Barb can recall the concern about these 2 dating. Now, can you imagine? I'm the good Catholic girl from the good Catholic family, and I'm dating the boy north of the tracks. and that's exactly kind of what it was too, because then, in our family. Yes, this is the young man that I was. So at the church, they were talking, what is going to become of these 2? So
the reason why this is in my wallet is I'm the track coach and cross country coach at Gladstone High School. I've been doing it about 12 years. Once our kids were older, so I basically stayed at home for 20 years with the kids. And then I got renewed my teaching certificate, and I never really have taught in full time, but I've been subbing in coaching. So for about the last 12 years, and the kids got a hold of a picture from somewhere, and they said, well, bring your high school picture. And so I had this crazy thing in my wall. Keep forgetting it's in there.
Yeah, it keeps it real for the kids.
Yeah.
But so anyway, then we ended up dating in high school, and so even though on the outside, life can look so idyllic. I was involved with, student council and drama, and was a debater, was up here at Northern, and would debate at Northern's campus as a negative speaker on the debate team. And everything looked, worldly successful. But as a young woman, I was morally not on target. I mean, spiritually, you just wonder what happens in adolescence. It's like the worldly temptations begin to compete, and just like Eve in the garden, you start going, really, is any of this really that bad? And my parents are just out of touch with what's happening in what's really fun in culture. They want me to stay home, but why would I want to stay home? I want to go out and be with my friends, and so there's the drinking and the different things going on. So I would have to say I pretty much ventured totally away from the church at that point. And then Gary's family wasn't church, so his household was a very free household to go and be at, because you know, whatever you did would seem to be okay there. There was nobody being judgmental, you know.
But we did have a few, we were involved in playing music, guitar and stuff at some weddings. And there's a friend of ours who worked at the Hermans, Chris Herman. And then we remember being here for back in 70s.
Youth to Youth?
Youth to Youth, I don't know, but we were,
Yeah.
a friend of mine family was Catholics, and so, I'll go with you. So we were up here in Marquette one
Yeah, so
spring.
we kept dabbling,
Yeah.
and we were I remember being at the Garden Retreat Center. So there was that youth, you know, that attempt to reach the youth for the faith. But I just remember always having some kind of resistance. But it all kind of came to a head in after I went off to college and pretty much flunked out of college and decided, you know, smoking pot and hanging out with people was more important than going to class. Again, no dialing into the suffering of my parents. I'm sure my parents were just agonizing over what is going to become of this daughter of theirs. And so I didn't go back to college because I knew I was wasting their money. And we were still dating at that point, and he was putting on aluminum siding up here at Marquette, working, you know,
Marquette,
working out his
yeah.
salvation in the hard labor of winter. And but we both decided we were going to go down to Central Michigan University, and so re-enrolled in college, went off to college, but that summer became pregnant. And so when I went down to college, my first stop was kind of the health center because I had my suspicions of what was going on. And so the test was positive, and we had we weren't talking marriage, we weren't talking long-term commitment or anything. We liked each other, and we loved each other, I'm sure, at that point, but we weren't at that place in a relationship where we were talking about being together forever. And the first proposal made by the physician as I sat crying in his office was nobody needed to know about this. There was an easy solution to this, and even in my emotional state, I knew what he was talking about, and it was just like a slap across the face. And there is the beginnings of realizing the faithful Catholic mother who was in prayer, because even though I had rejected going to church and rejected, taking on, the Catholic faith, she had instilled in me such a strong sense of the sanctity of life. Abortion was nowhere on the radar, and yet it would have made perfect worldly sense. You're off at Central, no one needs to know, take care of it, go back to town, no one needs to know. No embarrassment for the family. You could even justify that it would save your parents, right? All that suffering of having a child out of wedlock. But, and then interestingly, where did I go for some help? I went to the Catholic church on campus and began working with them. And at that point, the initial response was not, oh, well, we'll get married. It was kind of like, what are we going to do? And of course, as a young woman, you're looking at him to fix it, right? You're looking for him to be the rescuer. And when he sort of came across as like, what are we going to do? And then I thought, well, that's it. Okay, I will put this baby up for adoption because I don't feel like I'm in a position to have a baby right now. So that was the plan. I was going to put our firstborn up for adoption. And I moved in with a family. They had 5 children. The idea was I was supposed to be helping them out. I look back and I go, I don't know how much help I was. But I was throwing up, and she was. But anyway, it was a gracious way for me to be able to kind of work through this. Well, it didn't take too much working through. We were going to meet. Continued to date a little bit, and it was kind of that decision making that if we do not keep this child, we're not going to stay together, because I just couldn't give away a baby and then just go on like it never happened. And the man in him surged, and we decided we were going to get married. And that's when the real friction started, and I still don't have that all worked out in my head, because I'm sure the priest at the time was acting in good conscience for what he thought was the right thing to do. And perhaps it was absolutely by God's will, but he refused to marry us. He thought it was under duress, And he felt like since I was going to put the baby up for adoption, that this change in plan was a more out of emotion, it wasn't well thought out, and he refused to marry us. And he called our parish priest and advised him not to marry us. And so what did we do? We just left the, like any hope of coming back into the church at that time, and we went to the Justice of the Peace, and we got married over Christmas break so we could move into married housing in January. And so then that's what we did. And then in in April, our little baby boy was born. And this is where the story gets very interesting, because we, the whole experience of birthing a child was absolutely the most miraculous thing that I'd ever seen. And in fact, I had such a fear of needles that I refused any anesthesia whatsoever. So they're coming in.
We were older by then too. We were like 20.
Yeah.
We weren't teenagers anymore.
And so I'm so grateful that I refused the shots for pain, because it kept me fully aware of everything that was going on. And when they put that baby boy in my arms,
I couldn't believe the size of the needle they used for the episiotomy.
yeah, but it was just an incredible experience for us as this young couple that did not plan this for our life. And so from then, we brought our baby boy home, and this was now married life, and we were launched. But very quickly, when you have a child, you begin to know you need some kind of spiritual direction and help. And it's very odd that we didn't just automatically go back to the Catholic Church, but we began being witnessed to by some evangelical Protestants. But as we look back, it's very interesting who the evangelical Protestants who witnessed to us. The same summer, that was the year, Hans was a baby, so it was.
We'd always go. We were down at Mount Pleasant going to school, but every summer we'd come back to Newburgh, because I had a job at the DNR, with a full-time seasonal job at the Waterways Division. She worked in the pharmacy, so we would just come back, and our parents really wanted us to be with them, I'm sure, but yeah.
We would move back in with our parents. And,
then head back in the fall.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Oh, that's my train of thought.
You're talking about the two.
Oh, yeah. So that summer, I remember I was walking down the street, and a car stopped, and it was somebody we had graduated from high school, and he wondered if he could talk to me. And it was actually a young man that I had dated in high school, and now I'm, married with a baby. But his intentions were pure. They were, and he proceeded to lead me. He was very excited. He had accepted Christ as his Savior, and he was totally in love with Jesus, and he wanted me to know all about it. And I remember sitting there thinking, this is odd. Like, why does he want to tell me about his personal relationship with Jesus? But he began reading from Romans, and he took me down what's called, in the Protestant world, the Roman road. For all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God, and the wages of sin are death. And it's all scriptural truth about the reality. And for some reason, the simplicity of sitting in that car and hearing one person speak these messages of truth in little sound bites, I started to get it. But then he had me write down my sins on a piece of paper. Sounds kind of funny, doesn't it? Kind of like confession? He had me write him down. He said it's not for him to see, but he wanted me to write him down. And then he said, do you believe what God says, that when we confess our sins, he is faithful and he forgives our sins? And I'm like, I'd be calling God a liar if I didn't believe that, right? So I said, yeah, I believe that. And then he ripped up my sins, and he said, your sins are washed away. And for some reason, in that moment, I got it. And I fell in love with Christ, and that began the personal walk with Jesus Christ. He was a former Catholic. He went through the Catholic schools in Newberry, and his mother was a faithful Catholic, probably on her knees praying, and he spent the rest of his adult life trying to convert his mother, which is so ironic to me, but he wasn't sure she was saved. But the irony is, Bill was put in my life to teach me, to bring me back and give me milk when I wasn't ready for meat. And I needed that. Now you tell what happened to you. He always gets emotional. This is very...
Yeah, it was a friend who worked in waterways, Tim Tennis. He was a Vietnam vet, and he worked, and then he kind of, you know, I know Mary saw the spiritual awakening, and Tim was a very strong, he was an ex-Catholic too, and very strong evangelical. He went to the Baptist church in Newberry, and then so he kind of, I think we were both just searching, and definitely, and then that summer of 1976, we both became evangelical.
Yeah. And we started attending the Protestant church, and, you know, no more drinking, no more, you know, we had the straight life, but it also gave a strong foundation for raising children and having that, the beauty of prayer. Church became that place where you go for the potlucks and where you go for vacation Bible school, and we needed that. We were young. We might have raised our children very differently, and that's why. The picture here, because this is what our family began to look like in our evangelical Protestant world. This was actually taken in the basement of the church because they were putting together a church directory. And I look back at that.
This would have been 1994.
Yeah. So for the rest of the years, we started out at a Baptist church, we went to a Reformed church, we went to like a University Reformed Church of America. It's kind of like as long as they were preaching the word and, you know, that people loved Jesus and were friendly with us, that's all the theology we were looking for. Like people could have asked us, well, are they Calvinists, or are they this? I don't know. We just would go and, you know, sing songs and praise God on Sunday and, you know, try and raise our children. And so it is interesting that it is almost a childlike faith, because we weren't really looking at theological issues. Those came later. So with the birth of each of our children, it's like God brought us deeper, because there was something also instilled in me from my Catholic parents about contraception. I abhorred it. Couldn't, you know, it made sense. Okay, you're in college now. It's kind of hard to have babies and go to college. And then the decision to go to apply to medical school. And at that point, we had the 2 children, and then I went to medical school, and we were just kind of going along, trying to make ends meet and whatnot.
I said I'd stay home for a few years with the kids, and I graduated in '79. I graduated 4 years from Central, and Mary needed 1 more year to finish up, so I worked in Midland in fisheries biology. And then I said, well, I'll stay home for a couple of years. You want to go to medical school? Well, 20 years later, 2000 came along.
Yeah, we can think of when the kids are out of school, you know, or
we kept having children, so. Yeah.
So, but in the meantime, he's like Mr. Fix-It man. He's running. He's very engaged in what the kids are doing and doing all the running around that you hear young moms always talk about. Well, that was him. And then when I was an intern, we lived in medical housing, and he was there unloading groceries for the ladies who were on bed rest, threatening premature delivery, while their OBGYN residents were at the hospital where I was, and he was doing the carpooling with all the ladies, and it was just hilarious because it was truly totally reversed, but he became the go-to guy, you know, go out and get my car started and jump my battery and everything for all the wives whose husbands were at the hospital.
Yeah.
It was.
I was doing a lot of running. I was running running 70, 80 miles a week. You know, so she'd come home and I'd go for a run. And I was running for the Michigan Adidas team. We were sponsored through Adidas, and it was in Lower Michigan. We had our own team. So I was doing a lot of running, in the weekends I'd do some road races, but usually when you're running that much, you gotta run twice a day, so I'd run in the morning before she'd take off, and then she'd get home for a little bit. Okay, I gotta go for another quick little run, and so.
Yeah. That was his coping strategy.
Yeah, so my running helped.
That's my next one.
But, so that brings us up to, you know, life was pretty good. It's not like we were unhappy in the evangelical world we were living in. In fact, I would look at, you know, a lot of my, you know, other people who were Catholics and think, wow, if they only knew how great it was, and so you were always wondering if Catholics were saved and that kind of thing. But then a very interesting thing happened. We ended up in Gladstone at the Covenant Church, which is sort of coming from the Swedish Lutheran tradition. And again, very wonderful community. We were happy there. And our kids were raised going to Bible camp and everything. They were very, they had not really been Catholic at all because they were raised totally in the Protestant world. But our son, Hans, our little boy who, we chose life and who brought us together in marriage and everything. And I had always, when he was little, we would always sing songs to Jesus, and I could see this deep love for God in this little boy's heart. And it was always like such a witness to me that his faith was so beautiful, Well, he ends up going off to a Protestant seminary, and he's going to be a Protestant pastor, but he's got a Catholic friend, Matt Maringer, if any of you know him, and they would have long theological debates, and Matt and the Holy Spirit debated him right into Catholicism. And when he came home from Protestant seminary and said he's going to become Catholic, and the joy in him as he goes, Mom, and he would be sitting there telling me about Mary as the new Ark of the Covenant, and he would just go through, because he loves history, and he would go through biblical history and give the details.
The early church fathers.
I didn't know any of that. And he began just catechizing us into the truth and was so excited about Catholicism. And then he met, through this time, he had also met Amy, his wife, wife over a rather short period of time, because I think they
She
met
graduated from high school with Father Ben Haas.
Yeah, so Father Ben is actually the godparent to their oldest child. But so they met in April. He proposed in September for a January wedding, and they were pregnant with their first on their honeymoon. And so that's this picture of the new evangelized Catholic family resurging, where you have 2 children in 1 year because you didn't contracept even between them, even though they were both cesarean sections. I mean, Amy's kind of going against all the medical advice and everything, not intentionally, but because of an openness to life. And so far, after every C-section, they've told her how great her uterus looks. So, but yeah, this will be, they're pregnant due in April, and this will be a 6th C-section in 8 years. So that's testing the limits of the body. But
This is about 2004 they got married.
yeah.
And we didn't come into the church until 2008.
Yeah. So as we were watching them grow as a little family and seeing the witness of our son, they were married in 2004. Now we're introduced to the world of the grandparent, which is a whole new dimension for any of you who have had grandchildren, where now you have the maturity of life, but you have the absolute joy and delight in watching the uniqueness of each of these children that God has created. And you recognize that children are not some little, like bringing these pictures was not to show off children like there's something you own. It's to impact that without the decision to give birth to this child, you would not have all these other children, because I suspect my life would have taken a real downward spiral. And this son, is a brother to this one, and these two are best of friends. Look at the age difference, but they're best of friends now as adult children. And then these came as a twosome, twins. And I was pregnant with twins with Marcus, and he still grieves in his own way the loss of a twin that he doesn't know whether it was a brother or a sister. But with the bearing of children, they each have an appreciation for the sanctity of life, because they look around and they realize that without the sanctity of life, without allowing life to come into the world, you don't have brothers and sisters, and you don't have aunts and uncles and cousins. But anyway, so in 2005, this is when things are really getting serious now. We're watching our son, and we're awed and amazed we're, still Protestants, and we're doing couples Bible studies, and our son introduces us to theology of the body. You want to do that as a couples, Mom and Dad? Sure, I'm sure our Protestant friends would be totally open to John Paul's teachings. So we did.
We always had them up, in our house. We had
Yeah.
a room upstairs.
We called it the upper room, it would be filled up with couples and
All Protestant.
we started, all our Protestant friends, many of which former Catholics. It's a big group out there. And so we started studying theology of the body, and I was just blown away. I mean, it totally healed any problems with sexuality, and it gave me an incredible draw of wisdom for ministering to my patients as well, because so many couples get into trouble. That first baby comes along, the wife is tired, the husband thinks something broke when she gave birth to the child because she's just not as they don't grasp the utilitarian nature of the relationship, and that love of the spouse is so much more of a holistic love than satisfying each other's needs. And so just the whole terminology of theology of the body and living life generously was redemptive, both in our relationship and then in several of the couples, I think, drew from it, even though, they didn't necessarily become Catholic and were always like skeptical when anything that was specifically Catholic. But that definitely started us along our way. And I became an NFP-only doctor after that. I stopped prescribing birth control altogether. And then through that decision, Colin Jenkins gave my name to a priest named Father Morose, who made a trip over to Delta County and wanted to meet with me and talk about this. And we talked about it. He introduced me to Catholic Medical Association. And I went to my first Catholic Medical Association meeting and was absolutely blown away. I wasn't even Catholic, and it was holy. It was just profound for me. And then that began a journey that now has ended up, we have now just started a Catholic Medical Association guild that will be starting for the Bergen Diocese. So after doing that, we started the Salvation Timeline. How many of you have done the Salvation Timeline?
Jeff Cavins.
Jeff Cavins. Yeah, it's very, very.
We were Catholic and we started, Mary was doing it, I said, I want to be back in the Bible study. So I started, our son Hans was putting it on, so I said, I'll go along with you.
Yeah. So again, Hans becomes our teacher. We go through that, and it was just incredible. And so that led to me going to confession, because since I had been confirmed, I just needed to go to confession. And so I re-entered the church. And then
it was about 2007, and I went into the RCIA class. But even before all that, it was like they had some friction in the Protestant church we were at from 87 until 2008, so over 20 years, and then it was just, we felt drawn back.
Yeah. And you could tell things were starting to unravel, and we were raising questions about the way things were done. And
it was the beauty of it.
Yeah, it was truly the beauty of it. So now of our children, Hans had already come into the church. Our daughter Elizabeth was dating a Catholic young man that was totally ready to become Protestant for her, which is so ironic, because he wasn't well rooted in his faith. But then she begins growing in her Catholic faith and is absolutely blown away by the beauty of it. And guess who she's married to? A strong Catholic man that was ready to become Protestant. And he's just a beautiful, strong Catholic father. And they are pregnant with their third child. And they gave birth to these beautiful little 32-week-old twins that did not survive. And so they, in their young married life, have lost 3 children and now are pregnant with a third living child. And God gave them strength and courage.
Now this is their oldest
to go
little.
through this. Yeah, that's Gianna. That's their and she's
Named
named
after
after
Saint.
Saint Gianna Mola, because
She's a,
yeah.
Just the twins, they were about, one was 3 pounds, one was 4 pounds.
Yeah.
Yeah, but she's, yeah.
we just look at the timing of that, because I think that would have crushed her. I think that would have instilled such fear of bearing children in her if it had been at a different phase in life. But where she was in her faith life, she totally grasped that we bear children not to own them, but to give them back to God. And she totally grasped that her first baby she miscarried, and now these 2 children, and she said, Mom, 3 of my children are already in heaven with God. And that gave her the strength to carry on. And so they said, don't get pregnant for a while, because she had to have a cerclage, all this intervention. It was, quite difficult. She was undaunted. And
She's a young lady who hasn't had periods either, so it's kind of
yeah, there was a
strange.
question on whether she could even get pregnant, and it's totally, she's just given her fertility to God, and God is just making something so beautiful. So, and then during the time that Beth and Adam, sorry, we're all over the map here. How are we doing for time?
You got about 10 minutes.
Okay. During the time that she was going through pre-Cana counseling, or I guess counseling, before they got married with a priest downstate, it came out the journey we were on, and then when he found out that I was a physician, he said, well, do you think she'd want to go to World Youth Day and be the doctor for our group from the Diocese of Saginaw? So he called and asked if I wanted to go to World Youth Day in Australia. So I did, and so I got to see Pope Benedict like really close, and so that was just, and I wept, and I was just like, this is like, after working through, like, do you believe, in the authority of the Pope and all this, like doing it at a head level, and then you're in that context, and here he comes. And I just wept, and I thought, what is this? But it was just an amazing kind of experience that just sort of was one of those, almost felt like an anointing that, yes, there's no doubt here. But let's see, we'll get to the end of the road here. So all of our children except for our second oldest has come into the church, and then and then one of our sons is walking a little more rebellious now, second guessing the decision he made. He reminds me a lot of myself at that age, so I remain hopeful as Saint Monica that when his conversion comes, it will be a powerful one, because he questions everything. And so he's got to work out these issues. And Gary actually had printed off a meditation from the Year of Faith, the Magnificat Companion, that I think addresses the issue when we try to rely on our own understanding and question the church's teachings on things, either from questions from our own imagination or questions that are being asked, like, well, what about the population? Aren't we doing more good controlling the population than, encouraging the bearing of children, and all the issues that face, especially the young of today, global warming and concern about the environment, and that's all important. But you know what? God is sovereign. He's got the planet under control. What we need to worry about is, do we love our brother next to us? And do we care for the people that he's brought into our lives? And can we trust him with our children? And so the young people, I think, there's a lot to try and process. But in the end, I know for me, it was a matter of, I walked away from the church and I preferred to do things my own way, just like Eve in the garden. Thought somehow you had more wisdom. Okay. Yeah. Identify your faith with that of the church without paying attention to the movements of your heart, which seem contrary to it. For those feelings that arise in you are not what you believe, but the faith of the church is what you believe, though you neither see it nor feel it. in this feeling culture we live in. I mean, you know, people rely too heavily on what they feel about something. Accept these disturbances patiently, then, as a trial sent from God to purify your heart and confirm your faith. Like, do you want to have this baby? It's going to be really inconvenient and it's going to upset your life. Or do you want to dispose of this baby and keep things, you know, simple for everybody around you? That's the decisions that young girls are being faced with. It seems in the moment of making a decision about abortion that somehow it's the right decision. You should love and respect also all the laws and ordinances made by prelates and those that rule the church concerning the faith, the sacraments, or the conduct of Christians. Assent to them humbly and sincerely, even though you do not know their cause and some seem unreasonable to you. Do not condemn or criticize them. Respect them all, though they concern you very little. Do not receive under color of greater holiness, as some foolish people do, any opinion, whether it comes from your own imagination or the teaching of other men, if it is contrary in any way to the law or teaching of the church. And beyond this, you should confidently believe that you are chosen by the mercy of God to be saved as one of his elect. Never depart from this hope, whatever you see or hear, or whatever temptations come upon you. So if you're walking in obedience to what you know to be good, true, and beautiful, and it's in direct agreement with what the church teaches, and you're asked by a well-meaning evangelical Protestant, are you saved? Don't back away from it. Jesus died that we be saved. We're being saved, and we hope to be saved because it's the sanctification and the staying true to what God teaches that leads to salvation. And that question is derailing Catholics because they somehow, I mean, it did us. I mean, in a way, I guess it make you right pickings for the evangelical world if you're not rooted in your faith, because we weren't rooted in our faith. So, in closing, the things we love now, going to Catholic Medical Association, sitting like hobbits in our chairs by the fire, doing our morning devotionals, participating in different teachings like Jeff Caven's teachings. We're doing the video series of Walking Toward Eternity. So we love gathering with other Catholics on this pilgrimage and learning together, going on the March for Life, and just fellowshipping with brothers and sisters in the cause of life. And every day in my office, I encounter one-on-one divine appointments with people who are making decisions about life and death, whether it be at the beginning of life or the end of life, and being able to just stay focused on the sanctity of every life, that our job is not to value some lives greater than others, but that God's hand in everybody's life is working out his will.
So even with the new evangelization, one of the websites I love going to is wordonfire.org with Father Robert Barron, who, if you're familiar with him, he's the one who did the Catholicism DVDs, and he just came out with another little 8 or 9 minute segment of talking about new evangelization. And where does the new evangelization start from? It starts with the beauty of the church. He goes, that's where we need to start. Because you don't start with the truth, because people get in today's society, people get
who are you to tell me what's true?
Right.
And your truth is.
So we look at the beauty. I think that's what we long for, the beauty of the church, and that's what really brought us back. But he talks about the new evangelization by pointing to the beauty of the church, and that's just beautiful to me.
Any questions?
Yes, could you extrapolate a little more on that, what you mean specifically by the beauty of the church?
Well, to give you an example, I mean, part of it is our own experience in our life, that had I followed the wisdom of the world and either aborted or at any point in time sterilized, because like our twins were born when I was 37, and there's all kinds of messages the world is giving people that this will make your life better. trust me, this will make your life better. And women, I mean, I relate more to women. I mean, Gary can probably have the male perspective, but that women are sold this bill of goods that somehow if they keep control over their life will be much happier. And I never planned one of my children. In fact, quite frankly, every time it was a bit of a mini crisis. I mean, I was a resident when I found out I was pregnant with Elizabeth. I mean, that would have not been great timing. I mean, I'm up all night, I'm throwing up between patients. It was, pretty horrible, And then came up here and came to the Marquette residency. But God always put support that got us through it, And I remember we lived over on Spruce Street, and I come home, and now, I gave birth to this child, and now I'm back at the residency, and I was dashing home to breastfeed her or something, and she's in the little baby carrier on the roof because he's fixing the roof of the house. It was just, there's just a beauty in this spontaneous, it just works. You can't figure out where you're going. So the beauty of the church, to me, is that God loves people. We are the crown jewel of creation. We're not here to fix the earth. We're stewards, we're to take care of it. But the earth is here for human beings. He's got the population under control. I mean, if people are suffering, it's because we're neglecting our brothers and sisters. The more people there are, should be more people to love other people. The worst thing I think you could ever do to an impoverished woman is to take her children away, to sterilize her, to give her birth control pill, to build an abortion clinic in an immigrant neighborhood so the immigrants have equal opportunity to destroy their unborn. Because I would have never known that as a 19-year-old, that my children it wouldn't be having a medical degree, it wouldn't be having a nice house or having a nice car. It would be living in a community with other people that love each other, of going to choir on Thursday night and singing the most beautiful songs. It's like beauty to walk into a church, and instead of walking into it like a Protestant going, Catholics and all their statues, to go and go, these Catholics and all their beautiful statues and all the paintings and the stained glass that have preserved the truth of the history of the church. Why would you want to take any of that away? When I saw some, churches that were redone after Vatican II, thinking that was, what the people wanted, I realized, no, that was superficial. That wasn't what the problem was. But anyway, I don't know if that's... Any other questions?
Just one, Dr. Mary. How difficult for you professionally? You mentioned that you've become, NFP doctor. How difficult has that been for you professionally?
Well, since we live in a world where contraception is quite available, it probably means that some people see me and never come back. I mean, in the beginning, it would be a little bit, you take it, you feel kind of sad, But now I just pray that even if it ends uncomfortably, that if I can just be a vessel of love, not of judgment, and I always try and just make sure at the end, I don't want you to feel judged. I said, I'm not making this decision for you alone. I'm making this decision for me because I can't in good conscience, aid you in this. But from that standpoint, some women will just go to somebody else. But I would say there have been seeds sown that I don't even know. Like we were out to breakfast one morning, and the waitress came up to me and said, I just want to thank you for whatever you said to my daughter, because something changed after that, and I knew who her daughter was. And so even though in that moment her daughter was angry with me, it penetrated. There are multiple, actually, instances, but it's been over years. And so uncomfortable moments, I've seen fruit later where that discomfort turned into something else down the road.
I just want to thank you for doing that, because I know I've worked with many other doctors downstate in the Catholic Medical Association that have made the decision you've made, and it is very, very difficult, but the seeds that you are planting is just amazing, and what is happening to doctors who made the choice that you have made. Thank you very much for doing that.
Well, thank you. I hope we didn't rabble on too much.
You have a great story. I hope if you haven't already been on Marcus Broadride's journey home,
Yes.
and that you will be.
Well, you know, there's so many stories, and I think they're just kind of endless. But I think what we can hope for, like, right now in Escanaba, we have two, one of a youth minister coming from Assembly of God, and then another one from an ecumenical or a non-denominational church, pastors that are coming into the Catholic Church.
Yeah,
True
this
believers
couple,
are
they were,
hungry as the churches begin to cave in on issues that people know to be non-compromising. They're looking for a home where the truth is protected. That's why don't waver on the truth. Don't feel like you have to be apologetic for what the Catholic Church teaches, because if you waver, it's just become another cafeteria option. But when you become Catholic and you're truly Catholic, you have made some very distinct decisions about life. And that's when God's graces are unleashed in your life in a way that you would never know if you stay compromising. You know, for all the women who've tied their tubes, they will never know. But you know, the fallout in the generation we're seeing now is their kids to rise up and take care of their elderly parents. You know why? I've noticed a pattern. For the Catholic families that had all those kids, you know who is the number one caretaker who shows up to take care of mom and dad in their elder years? It's that youngest child, that 40-year-old bombshell, you know, I mean, when she was 40 and going, oh my goodness, I'm pregnant again. And then that 40-year-old now is 40 when mom's 80. And they're the ones that are going, oh my gosh, you know, my mom, you know, and they're there taking care of them. I was just on the phone last night with, you know, a son who is, you know, going to be on a plane and up here. And so there was unforeseen consequences in the decisions people are making. The lack of grandchildren. You know, I have my 2 kids, and now they're successful out there, but they have no intention of having children. And so I'm retired now, and I have 2 children immersed in their careers, and this is it. I have no little ones sitting on my lap, no one to go that's going to come fishing with me, or, you know. So unintended consequences, that this is the joy of life.